one with a cattle. Welcome everyone and good evening. This is the North Western Area Planning Committee meeting today, Tuesday, 25th of May 2021. My name's Councillor Maddie Thompson and I'm the chairman of this committee. Welcome back everyone. In particular, welcome to Councillor Stevens who joins us. Congratulations on your election. This might feel slightly less peculiar to you than the rest of us, but you know, if you have any problems, just let us know and we'll sort you out. There are just a few housekeeping issues to run through. The setup of the meeting has been designed to mitigate COVID, and we ask members to work to the protocols agreed at council meeting on the 29th of April 2021 in the interest of member and officer safety. We do have a limit of 17 persons, whether officers, members or public, in the chamber. Tonight there has in fact been room for one member who wishes to attend, but if we were full of other people, that wouldn't be possible, I'm afraid. The meeting will be streamed live and recorded, and by being present in the meeting you're giving your consent to being recorded. Members and officers, during each item, please hold up your hand to indicate if you wish to speak. I will then invite you at the appropriate time. The process this evening will obviously be slightly different. For some items I may invite each member to speak in turn. Therefore I encourage all members to keep your contributions as clear and concise as possible, please. When invited to speak, please remain seated, remove your mask, put on your visor and speak clearly. When speaking and referring to the agenda papers, please ensure you reference a page or paragraph number and keep your contributions as clear and concise as possible. Right, item 2 is apologies for absence.
Thank you, Chairman. Apologies been received from Councillor Siddle and Councillor Miss White. Thank you.
Thank you. Item 3 is the minutes of the 10th of March. It's recommended that the minutes of the meeting held on the 10th of March 2021, found on pages 7 to 12, are approved as a true and accurate record. I have so moved. Do I have a second? Councillor Durham, thank you very much. Does everyone agree? Does anyone dissent? Does anyone have any matters of accuracy they need to address?
I agree.
Can we agree that by saying? Okay, thank you very much. Right, item 4 is declarations of interest. Hands up please if you have a. Councillor Durham.
Thank you, Chairman. A non-pecuniary interest as a member of Essex County Council who are statutory consultees in terms of certain aspects of planning applications. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Fleming.
A non-pecuniary as a member of Essex County Council. Thank you.
Any others? Okay, thank you very much. Right then, we get to item 5, which is our only planning application this evening. That is the barn at Old Mill House, Vineyard, Hazeleigh, Lane, Woodham, Mortimer. We have the report. We do have a public speaker. I think there's been a bit of confusion about when requests to speak have to be submitted because of the change. So I have allowed this, but I'll be a bit strict in the future. So, Ms. Duncan, could you present the report, please?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Planning permission is sought for the conversion of an existing agricultural barn to a dwelling house for the vineyard manager at Old Mill House Vineyard. This application follows a previously refused application for the same proposal at the site, which was refused in May of last year. The previous application was refused on the basis that inadequate information had been received to justify the essential need for workers' accommodation in this location, which would be outside of a defined settlement in an unsustainable location. It was also considered that the converted agricultural building to a residential dwelling house would have a detrimental impact on the character and appearance of the countryside. This is the location plan for the site. The application site area is outlined in red and it comprises 2 vineyards as well as the existing barn which is located in the centre of the site in the faded red. The blue line indicates the extent of the land which is also in the applicant's ownership. The application site is located within the countryside out of any defined settlement. This is the existing block plan for the proposal. These are the existing elevations. These are the proposed elevations. These are the existing floor plans. This is the proposed ground floor plan. The proposed first floor plan, which shows that 4 bedrooms are proposed. And this is an aerial photograph provided by the applicant of the site. These photographs are taken from Hazeleigh Lane, showing the existing barn and an access point. From this access point which has been created, you can see the existing house, Old Mill House, which is a listed building, which serves the whole site, as you saw in the block plan. And this is a picture of Old Mill House. And this is an existing property located opposite the site access. These are photographs of the existing barn. So, to conclude, the application is recommended for refusal on the basis that the applicants have provided inadequate information to justify the essential functional need for a worker in this location, which is outside of the defined settlement in the countryside. As explained in the committee report for the application, the proposal has been assessed against Policy H7 of the Morden Local Development Plan. Policy H7 states that permanent or temporary accommodation in the countryside, where it relates to a rural enterprise, will only be permitted when a number of criteria have been met. The criteria include evidence to be submitted to the satisfaction of the council that there is a functional need for a full-time worker in this location in relation to a viable business. There are no suitable alternative dwellings available in the area to serve the identified functional need, and the size of the proposed structure is commensurate with the needs of the enterprise concerned. The development should also be designed to minimise the adverse impact on the character and appearance of the area. So, as noted within the committee report, due to the evidence submitted, it has not been demonstrated that there is an essential functional need for a vineyard manager at the site to reside on site on a permanent basis, nor has it been demonstrated that the 4-bedroom dwelling house would be commensurate to the needs of the business concerned. No evidence has been submitted to demonstrate that there are no other suitable alternative dwellings available in the wider area, or that the business is financially viable with secure future prospects. The conversion of the barn to a residential dwelling would also result in the urbanisation of the site to the detriment of the countryside. And given that the proposed development would result in the creation of a dwelling outside of a defined settlement boundary in an unsustainable location, for all of the above reasons, the application is recommended for refusal. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Right, we do have Mr. Rowe to speak. Could we get the timer up, please, Ms. Bird? Ah. Right, so I'm going to invite the agent, Mr. Rowe, to read out his submission. Can I remind you, you've heard this before, that I am very precise with my 2 minutes. I hate to be rude, but I also wouldn't like someone who cut out 10 important seconds to feel they'd been robbed because someone else had an extra 10. So please, make yourself comfortable, and the time starts when you're ready.
Thank you. Good evening, Madam Chairman and members. I'm Stuart Rowe, the agent for the applicant Richard Britton. Richard has firstly asked me to point out that the Parish Council did respond. I'm not sure whether it reached you or not, but the Council has apparently agreed the vineyard provides a beneficial addition to the village, contributing a further area of wine growing to the region with potential benefit for local employment. They recommended granting the application so on-site staff can manage the site efficiently. I don't have a copy of it, but I'm told that's the case. Richard's 74 and is retired. He set the vineyard up because he thought it would be fun to run one, generating enough grapes for him to sort of manage the site, the process of planting, nurturing and harvesting and bottling, and he thought he'd have his own wine label. Unfortunately, it all went rather swimmingly, and Richard has become a victim of his own success. The yields from the fields and the grape quality have been very high, too high for him to manage the process himself, and so he has had to appoint a farm manager the vineyard manager, a specialist. And the whole process is now managed from afar, as it were. The grapes are grown, harvested and transported to a state-of-the-art bottling plant at Bitnaker, where they're sold and incorporated into existing established wine labels. What the consequence of that means is that the barn, which is relatively recent structure, is actually now redundant. The idea of a sort of hobby farm didn't materialise. There are no real appropriate alternative uses for the barn in the context of the surrounding vineyard. So the significant impediment to future success concerns frost, and having someone on site, a manager, particularly to deploy heaters in those sort of frosty nights, is thought to be very important to the future of the business. Richard is, to be frank, too old to do it himself. His listed building is not part of the agricultural holding, and so he thinks conversion of the barn would be appropriate. So I hope that you're able to support it this evening. Thank you.
Impeccable timing. Before we move on with this, there's a couple of things I'd like to say. After some advice and training we've had from the Planning Advisory Service, I'm not going to put the recommendation to begin with. We're debating the application, not the officer's report. Another thing is, could we possibly get questions out of the way first before we start to have a debate or comment? Obviously questions may crop up. I'm not wishing to suppress that in any way. And the other thing is, we are no longer referring to ward members in particular, since we are all here for the district, not for our wards in particular. So, that being said, does anyone have any questions for any of the officers? Okay. Oh, hang on. Sorry, Councillor Durham, your pen is hiding behind the white bit.
Sorry, Chairman. Can I just clarify whether the application is for a dwelling, pure dwelling, or whether it is for a dwelling with an agricultural occupancy restriction, please?
Or Mr. Lee, you have one?
The description of the application is for the conversion of the agricultural barn into vineyard manager's dwelling house. So I assume that it would be an agricultural occupancy dwelling house.
I would assume so, Mr. Lee?
Do, Chairman, yeah, we have, as you can see in the officer's report, it has been assessed against the agricultural works dwelling policy, and that is the position put forward by the applicant. It is for that reason, so it has been assessed against that.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Keys?
I'm not quite with you what you said. Are we allowed to look at the pictures now, or we're not debating it? I don't really know. When you said...
No, I'm just giving an opportunity for questions before we debate, but that by no means rules out questions before. But if anyone has an item they'd like to clarify, then that might help all of us before we go on.
Could I clarify the entrance, please? Is that by the bridge that I saw earlier? And that takes you to that, through them gates, does that take you to the house as well as the barn, which they'd like to convert into a house?
Through you, Chairman, that this access shown on this photograph takes you to the barn. There is a separate access, if I show you on that. So there's another access point here,
Right.
which I did have a photograph of, I've just not included in the
that's
presentation.
Okay.
And then there's the
So which one's to the barn? That one,
here, which
that one there?
Yeah.
Right, and the landowner owns all that land?
yes. But just for your information,
Yeah.
the access point and this access drive, as well as all of the
Barn bits,
barn,
yeah.
the periphery of the barn
Yeah.
has not been approved in terms of planning permission.
So that access has been made through making a hole in the hedge and going up the field.
Yeah, just, yeah.
Okay, thank you for it.
Okay, thank you. I do have one question. I notice, the officers feel there's an insufficiency of evidence. I wonder if you, Ms. Duncan or Mr. Lee, could explain or clarify just what evidence you would have been looking for.
Yes, of course, Chairman. So, as part of the application, the applicants provided a planning statement which they detailed the need for the barn, or their identified need for the conversion of the barn to a dwelling house. house, and they stated that the barn needed to be converted to a dwelling house so a member of staff could reside on site at all times due to frost was the main reason, as well as efficiency of the running of the vineyard and security purposes. So we've obviously, in terms of the policy, we have to assess whether there is a functional need for a full-time worker to reside on site on a permanent basis. And obviously this is for a permanent conversion of the building, not a temporary permission for a mobile home, etc. And as part of the officer's report, so section 5.2, particularly 5.2.3, where we've discussed the evidence of the functional need for a full-time worker in this location, we have assessed the evidence submitted against the policy, and we are not of the view that there is a functional need in terms of the arguments put forward in terms of frost. Frost only occurs 3 times a year as per the evidence submitted by the applicants. So the need for a vineyard manager to reside on site to put out bougie candles when it is frosty or turn on wind turbines, we don't feel that there is a functional need for the dwelling house to be on site permanently all year round for 3 months of the year when there is warning that comes with frost. Obviously, I understand that Mr. Rowe stated that the applicant is not running the business permanently himself, so they have extra staff, but there is an existing dwelling house less than 150 metres away from the site. So we don't feel that there's an additional need for a dwelling house in this location for those purposes. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, is there any more no, sorry.
Are you happy to start debate?
Yes, I am. I've got you first, councillor.
Can I ask a question, Chair?
I'm sorry, I actually can't make out who you are. I'm so sorry.
Very forgettable.
Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Jarvis, sorry, of course, go
Thank
ahead.
you, Chair. Yeah, I was just going to ask, it's just a question about the sort of business case, because I can see that last time the application came through, there was criticism of not being a sufficient business case. And I thought I read that the applicant has put a detailed business case with accounts, submitted with the application. I'm pretty sure I saw some of those. I don't pretend to be an expert on vineyards as to whether it, but it looked to me like that was reasonable. Are you suggesting that that isn't a good business case, or have you not got that information?
Through you, Chairman. Is your question relating to the viability of the business?
Yes.
Okay. So, yeah, as part of the previous application, I could see that I wasn't the case officer for the application, but I could see that business reports or expenditure reports were submitted. Those were not submitted as part of this application. However, they also were not. So the previous business reports showed, which I don't have on the report, the presentation, otherwise I'd show you. They showed that, so that was submitted in 2020, and the reports showed that they had 1 year of sales in 2019, and then 2020, 2021, 22, 23 were all projected figures. Obviously, in cases such as this, we would expect at least a minimum of 3 to 5 years business details of their financial statements, etc. So in terms of the business, we feel that it's in its infancy at the moment. They haven't provided updated figures, so from May of 2020, we haven't now received, as part of this current application, new updated figures for 2020, so we can't even see or assess the viability of the business for the last 2 years at least. In situations such as this, we might allow or permit a temporary caravan or mobile home on site to allow the viability of the business to be shown. But obviously, this application is for a permanent conversion of an agricultural building to a dwelling house. So without such information about the viability of the business, we can't tick that off in terms of.
I see that. It's a pity, really, that that's not there. If I may, just the other question I have is just regarding, you mentioned that no survey of other properties had been taken. But that was pointed out in the earlier application as well, that seems a bit of a shortcoming too then, really, that they couldn't look at other properties. Although I suppose it all depends, not being wine experts, it all depends on how, whether somebody needs to be on site or not. What we really need is a councillor who's a wine expert, so that's I'm sure Councillor Fleming will jump in when we start debating, because that would be interesting to know. Obviously, we've all read the report, we've read the frosty weather issue. I mean, I know frosty weather, it is very unpredictable, I'm just saying. And we all know that frost can kill vineyards, the whole lot can go, in my experience, with other crops. So I'd be very interested to know that point, because it comes down to that point of, is it essential? Is it essential to have somebody there? We all can see that it would be very convenient, and it might make common sense. I'm sure somebody has been there, but on occasions, obviously over the last few years. But is it essential? This is a front issue, and it's difficult to grasp that unless you're sort of vineyard expert. But fortunately, we might hear some comments later. Thank you.
This is true. Mr. Lee wanted to just come in there.
Thank you, Chairman. Just for clarity, I know Ms Dungate did reference it, but our policy is clear that, when a development of business is relatively new, we do not grant permanent residential accommodation. And as the Officer Paul explained, we've only got 1 year, I think if that's correct, of evidence of financial records. So our policy is quite clear that we shouldn't be granting permanent residential accommodation in this instance. It should be a temporary permission to facilitate the development, because if the business was to fall, and it's not saying it will or it won't, but if it was to fall, then you would be stuck with a residential property in a place where, we should only be granting in exceptional circumstances. And that's why our policy allows for agricultural dwellings, because it is an exceptional circumstances, but it does need to be in a business where we are confident as an authority that it will have a long time and will have a life. And, unfortunately, this, from the information we've got, is it should be too soon, according to our policy, to be granting permanent permission.
Could I just ask, just on that very point though, if there was temporary accommodation, let's assume it was carried out and somebody was there, and you were able to build up business accounts for a few years, and then come back with an application and say, look, would that in itself tick that box, so to speak? Would that be convincing? And if you've done a survey of the other properties nearby, ticking that box, which seems to be a shortfall as well at the moment, that would all be helpful for the application.
The Chairman, obviously, that's exactly what our policy requires. So so if they, there is the requirement that if they could recover or overcome the other issues, then after an evidence period, then we would in theory support permanent.
Each 7. Thank you, Jim.
Okay, Councillor Durham, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Well, to a certain extent, Chairman, here we go again, don't we, with our policies, and we've all recently had planning training, external planning training, and the importance of adhering to our policies was very clearly spelt out to members. And I do have sympathy with the application, with the applicant, but unfortunately this is ringing really horrible bells for me with a local example. What we have here is a fairly new barn in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the countryside, that has now all of a sudden been allegedly found to have no particular use, and the fallback position is for a 4-bedroom dwelling. And I recall, unfortunately, a very, very long saga in my parish of a 4-bedroom agricultural dwelling, which was built on the pretext of having forestry next to it. That business failed, and a 4-bedroom agricultural dwelling is very difficult to justify, and it's very difficult to find another person to use it. So I am really gravely concerned, and a nice 4-bedroom dwelling it would make, but I don't think it's justified for an agricultural worker on the odd chance that it may protect a vineyard from frost. And I'm afraid at the moment, and as Mr. Lee has pointed out, we have insufficient evidence to prove that it is even necessary. And I think that if things fall over in the next few years, what we're left with is yet another large domestic dwelling in an unsustainable location outside of the village envelope, and we're just creating problems for ourselves. I would much rather see, as Councillor Jarvis has been alluding to, a temporary measure for 2 or 3 years so that we can assess whether this is actually required. But I have very grave reservations about granting this, I'm afraid, particularly given that this isn't an old barn that's having to be preserved. This is a brand new barn, and I'm certain that if the applicant can put his mind to it, I'm sure he could think of other uses for it other than a dwelling. Thank you.
Thank you. I have got you two, but Councillor Morley was next, then I've got Councillor Jarvis, Councillor Blair.
Yes, thank you, Mr Chairman. I just really need, is it possible to alternate the cost, automation I mean? Do you need to be there full time? That was the other thing. And I think we do, on the evidence, we do need to see a bit more evidence, I think.
Thank you.
To warrant it.
Councillor Fleming, as our resident expert.
Thank you, Chair. Possibly our business experience is relevant here. I can say that on our site we have only lost crop once in 16 years. We are a different site though. We're closer to the coast, so we get the air movement. This site is more inland. But yeah, we sort of had a catastrophic crop loss only the once in 16 years. Just to help you out, everybody on the committee.
Thank you.
But we are a different site, as I say. We are more closer to the river, so we get better airflow.
As an expert in the business, is one person enough, one staff, to deal with however many acres of vines we're talking about? I mean, do you not have to rope in lots of staff in such a circumstance? I've got too many lights on people. Thank you. Mr. Lee?
Don't turn it off, sorry.
Sorry, Chair.
Sorry,
Are you
Councillor.
talking about for frost prevention measures?
Yes.
So
Is this where everybody turns out, does it, wherever they live? Or?
yeah, so it would be more than one person, but as I say, we don't do it. We don't. It's a bit of a thankless task, and I'm told it doesn't really work. So you just sort of have to accept it.
Thank you for that. I haven't crossed my question list.
Yeah.
But I need to go to Councillor Jarvis first, then I'll come back to
Thank you,
Councillor
Chairman.
Jarvis.
That's very useful information there from Councillor Fleming. There's a few other points within the application I'd like to just raise, and perhaps we could then debate, which we haven't raised so far. One is there's sort of, I know the NPPF refers to the reuse of a redundant or disused building. Now, obviously, we're not putting up a new building here, but there is a barn there already. And, we can't, the situation is that the applicant built a barn for a particular purpose, and the business developed, and the barn is no longer needed for that purpose. We shouldn't really try and determine whether that was pre-planned or anything like that. That's the situation is what we've got in front of us. The situation in front of us is we've got a redundant building. So I think my understanding of the NPPF is that we should look for the reuse of the redundant building. I think that's something amongst a few things I'd quite like Hazeleigh to come back on, if you would. I think with regards to, I know Hazeleigh will be familiar with sections 82 to 84 of the NPPF, and that does give exceptional circumstances to agricultural buildings in rural settings with regards to being outside of the boundary, because most rural settings often are, and there's some special clauses there that give some extra degree of flexibility regarding the use of a building outside of the planning, outside of the normal boundary area, if it's for agricultural purposes. So I'd quite like, obviously, to comment on that as well. I think with regards to the size of the property, I think if one was looking at putting up a new property, of course, you'd say, well, that looks a bit big. But it is what it is, isn't it? There is a barn there, which is of a certain size. And of course, it may not be one individual at some point. It may be, sorry, I'm slightly distracted there. It may be that it's a farm worker who gets married and has a few children. I mean, I think we shouldn't be presumptuous. We should apply a very diverse policy. We shouldn't assume all farm workers are unmarried, for example. So, but I think the fact is, you've got a barn, so if you convert it to a property, it is the size that it is. The fact that that ends up being a 4-bedroom property is just because that is the size of the barn, if I can put it like that. And I'd quite like to know what's Lee's views on that. It's got car parking space already outside. I know I don't think there's been much reference to the garden, but I think previous applications turned down because of the garden size. And adjustments have been made, and I think the officers are satisfied with the size of the garden which is being put forward. So a lot has been said, often is, about properties causing an urbanisation effect, causing harm to the countryside. But this is a barn that already exists. There is very little alteration externally to the barn, a lot of internal work, of course. But I don't think it's substantially going to look different. I mean, I've gone to look at this barn, I look at all applications that I call in, and I've gone to look at it, and I can see it's not seen by that many other properties, if any. It's set obviously in the middle of the vineyards, as we can see. You can see there's not that much within sort of aerial view of it, within its sight line, so to speak. So in terms of harm to the countryside, any property is a harm to the countryside. But the question of weight and degree, let's really question whether it's any substantial harm at all to the countryside, because it's already there, and it's very in keeping as well, which I believe is one of the requirements. A building that is in keeping. It's a barn building, so it's in keeping with the countryside.
It is,
And I think that
wrap you up there.
Yes, and well, that's a very fortunate, Chairman, because I was just wrapping myself up. Thank you.
I think the point, I'm going to come
Would
to
you
you,
mind
Mr.
if this
Lee.
officer Lee comes back on a few of those points?
Part of the point about the urbanisation is if it's a dwelling that's necessarily domestic paraphernalia, there will be washing lines and garden sheds and potentially wendy houses and all sorts. So nobody lives in just a house. Mr. Lee, you might wish to add to that, or is it contradicted?
Thank you, Chairman. I won't quite answer it in the way that Councillor Jarvis sort of stated questions. I think maybe needs slightly a different approach. Government guidance is clear that dwellings in rural areas should only be allowed in exceptional circumstances, and one of those is agricultural dwellings when they are needed to support the commercial enterprise of the business. But the NPPF is also clear that the starting point for any application is the development plan unless material considerations indicate otherwise. And our policy, H7, supports the NPPF in relation to providing residential dwellings in the countryside through agricultural dwellings, and it provides the criteria that the council should look at when supporting these. And the fact is, as the Office report shows, there are a number of the points they haven't evidenced, and secondly, our policy is clear that we shouldn't be supporting a embryonic business in a provision of a permanent dwelling. So this policy and the NPPF go hand in glove together. The NPPF is just the broader guidance, and this is the specifics that we should be looking at. So this is further detailed than the NPPF, but that's our local plan, and that's the starting point for our determination of any application. And the second, obviously, there's two things. One, the policy requires that the property should be to meet the need of the business. It isn't about an aspirational property, it is about the need, and we're not saying that it will be assumed that the agricultural worker is going to be single, but on the flip side we shouldn't be assuming that it will be someone with a large family. And as Councillor Durham said, larger the property is, more difficult it would be to retain that as an agricultural dwelling in the long term if the business was to fail. And we've had numerous applications since I've been here at this committee and South East, I don't think many in Central, if any, for removing agricultural workers' dwellings on the basis that because they're so large, they're actually unviable to be meeting the needs of an agricultural worker. So, we've got that evidence that we've had those problems before. So I think that's quite an important criteria for the policy, and members should be aware of that. And as you said, Chairman, just because a building's there is intensification, car parking, of paraphernalia. And I do think Councillor Jarvis's point about basically there's a barn there, it won't cause additional harm. is a very dangerous statement for the committee to, any member of the committee to make, because, you know, people hear what, and use arguments like that against us, and that is basically saying that any agricultural building in the district could be turned into a dwelling, and that's a lot of dwellings through the countryside if we were to do that on such a full brush approach to termination of plan applications. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Durham, I know you want to come back, but there's others who haven't had their first go yet.
That's
So
fine.
I have in order Councillor Fleming, Councillor Keys and Councillor Stevens. So, Councillor Fleming, please.
Oh, no, actually, thank you, Chair.
Oh, right, you've done your bit. Okay, thank you. Councillor Keys.
I'll give way, because, and I'm sorry, I've forgotten your name,
Councillor
hasn't
Stevens.
spoken yet, and I've had one go. I would certainly like to come back after the lady.
Of course. Councillor Stevens.
Councillor Stevens, sorry, I'll remember that.
Thank you, Chairman, and I do apologise for my phone,
That's
which is on silent.
Yeah, I've had mine go off as well,
I
don't worry.
understand about agricultural exceptions, but I don't see that they're to do with convenience, and I don't see that the fact that it's agricultural lends special weight to convenience. Lots of businesses need people on site at funny hours of the day and night, and those staff are on call, and they just have to come in when they're called, and they don't live on site. If you're an IT technician, you don't live on site, and that's just how it is. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, yawning. Okay, Councillor Keys. Then we'll go back to Councillor Durham.
But I'll come back wearing a couple of hats. In mine, or Councillor Siddle's and my ward, we have just lost an appeal for a concrete road with a hole made for a hedge. I know it was going to a barn, which this is going to a barn at present. So, and I'm also, with my driving hat on, new accesses, big accesses for moving agricultural machinery and lorries about, which I will go, obviously, to move the grapes away from the vineyard. And I do commend the chap, because there is a heck of an expense on building a vineyard with all, if we could go back to the pictures, please, of all the metal work for the vines to hang over. This is not something I think is put up willy-nilly. It's not a case of running a tractor around with a drill, putting in some seed. There is a heck of a financial cost, so I cannot see him wanting to take it away too quickly. Also, frost twice a year. I was snowed in Great Tottenham last year for 3 days. Only way I could get over a four-wheel drive, so yeah, I don't think that probably goes to, there is more than one frost. And there's a barn there already. Yes, it's the size it is. Councillor Jarvis has said that. So, really any more to say, I don't think, on that. But I do commend him for the expense he's done to do that, and especially in this climate. So thank you.
I would just say, I think we're talking about the same barn. It did eventually succeed at appeal because extra evidence of need was produced at that appeal, having lost 2 appeals.
Still one is a film.
Through you, Chairman, there's nothing in this application or even refusal about the access or anything anyway, so it's not part of the consideration of this application, so
Okay.
I think it's a moot point.
Thanks. Yeah, but if we had the evidence, we would probably have granted it, but it was produced last
Still
minute.
one in a film.
Sorry, Councillor Fleming does want to turn back, so.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to clarify for Councillor Key's benefit. It's frost at a particular time of year that's dangerous. So it's frost when the buds have burst.
When
So
is
it-
that, Councillor?
So it can be very dangerous in May, for example. You've had warm weather, the buds burst, and then there's a frost, and then it kills the whole crop. So it's
So 3 days in May.
well, it doesn't often happen. We haven't experienced it. We've only experienced it once. But as I say, we're a different site. Thank you.
Right, I think we've been round everyone's first go, so Councillor Durham.
No, Chairman, I just wanted to come back to this 4-bedroom issue, because that was exactly the issue with a property in Woodham Water. The applicant kept coming back time and time again, saying because it was a 4-bedroom dwelling and it had an agricultural restriction, they couldn't find an agricultural worker that it suited, and that was their reasoning for getting the agricultural tie lifted. As I said, that application came here numerous times, went to appeal, and they lost on appeal because the the planning inspector did say that it was out of scale with the requirements for an agricultural worker's dwelling. So I accept the fact that that building is there, but I just am slightly concerned about it, and I will remain so. Thank you.
Mr. Lee, before I...
So just to back up Councillor Stone's point, we have won a hearing about an agricultural dwelling where they wanted to put a dormer in, to put a room in the roof. They already had one and they wanted an extra bedroom. You know, there is a policy, it has requirements, and inspectors do stand by it, and I would be very worried if members would just discount those requirements of the policy. I'm just saying what I've said in many committees, you know, but if we do ignore the requirements, we are watering down the policies and we are undermining our ability to defend ourselves against development that is against the LDP. Thanks, Sharon.
Absolutely, thank you. Yes, my two penneth is that, you know, I don't object to this on any kind of principle, but we have policies, and I don't see why applicants can't fulfil the requirements of the policies. We've had it with advertising commercial properties, they're not advertised, and, you know, members say, well, nobody's going to want that, are they? That's not the point. We have a requirement. We are opening floodgates to all sorts of things that we can't then stop, even when they're incredibly inappropriate, because we haven't followed our own policies. So, that said, I'm going to put the officer's recommendation to refuse. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Durham. Okay. I will put that. Oh, we're back to doing shows of hands. Can we have a show of hands, please? Those in favour of the officer's recommendation to refuse. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. Those against? That means there aren't any abstentions, so Councillor Keys was against. So, in fact, that application is refused for the reasons given in the officer's report. That actually brings us to the close of the meeting. I thank everyone for their time, for their efforts they're making to cooperate with the protocols, and I'm going to ask you to leave through that door, and could you please file yourselves out so we're not bumping into each other. I'm not going to form it, I'm not going to ask.